Throughout history, there have been numerous civilizations that have achieved greatness only to decline into nothing. Some were defeated and destroyed by invaders, while others were influenced by climate changes. Stay tuned to number 1 to find out the mysterious civilization that leaves archaeologists questioning whether or not they even existed. Number 10. Aboriginal Tasmanians. Not to be confused with the Tasmanian devil, this is perhaps the most tragic example included on this entire list. The Aboriginal Tasmanians are an indigenous group of people on the Australian state of Tasmania, which is located south of the mainland. Prior to the arrival of European explorers, the Tasmanian people had inhabited the island for 40,000 years. So, how did they get there? Well, it wasn't always an island, and there was once a land bridge connecting it to the mainland. Over that time, they developed numerous cultures in different tribal groups and maintained a thriving civilization on the island. That was until the Europeans arrived in the late 18th and early 19th century. Since then, the population of the Aboriginal peoples has been completely decimated by disease and Western intervention. By 1833, there were approximately 200 surviving Aboriginal Tasmanians, and they were tricked to surrender themselves, with the promise that they would be protected and provided for. But this just didn't happen. Instead, they were moved around from island to island, where diseases continued to reduce the already small population. Today, there are many people who claim to be descendants of the Aboriginal Tasmanians because they are children of native women who mated with the Europeans. Unfortunately, as is common among native peoples invaded or colonized by Western powers, the Indigenous Tasmanian language has been completely lost. Thankfully, however, there have been some efforts to reconstruct the language from certain works that have remained with a group of people known as the Palawa people. Number 9. Akkadian Empire. The Akkadian Empire was one of the first Mesopotamian empires and centered around the city of Akkad, and its influence stretched across Mesopotamia, the Levant, and Anatolia. Archaeologists debate the exact date of its emergence and decline, but it is generally dated to 2334 BCE to 2154 BCE. However, it depends on what book you read. The consensus is that it reached its political peak between the 24th and 22nd centuries BCE. So what happened to them? Well, archaeologists believe Akkad fell in the 22nd century BCE, and this resulted in the Dark Age, where there was likely no prominent imperial authority for some time. One explanation for its collapse is that the Akkadian dynasty simply couldn't keep political supremacy over other independent city-states in the region. Another explanation is that it was a result of rapidly increasing droughts and lack of rainfall in the region. Because, let's face it, you can't survive without water to drink or to grow crops. Perhaps it's not so surprising that many of the earliest civilizations located in the cradle of civilization, in the Near East and Northern Africa area, were heavily influenced by climate change. Number 8. Easter Island. Situated in modern-day Chile, Easter Island is one of the most remotely inhabited islands in the world. Archaeologists believe humans first arrived on the island between 700 and 1100 AD and were likely Polynesian people from either the Gambier Islands or the Marquesas Islands. So, how did they get there? Well, they used canoes. Yep, that's right, they traveled across the sea from between 1,600 and 2,000 miles away. Although it might not even sound possible, experimental archaeologists were able to reconstruct a canoe and make it from Mangareva to Easter Island in just 19 days. The inhabitants appear to have created a thriving civilization on the island, and archaeological investigations have uncovered enormous statues, stone platforms, stone houses, and petroglyphs. The island is most famous for its moai, and a total of 887 monolithic stone statues have been found across the island. So, what happened to the people of Easter Island? Well, by the time the Europeans arrived in the 18th century, the population of the island had already dropped to between 2,000 and 3,000 people, which was a significant decline in comparison to the estimated 15,000 just a century earlier. The consensus is that the island was slowly deforested and left due to a lack of natural resources. Without natural resources, the island could no longer support such a large society, so the population experienced a gradual attrition. Number 7. Minoan Civilization. The Minoan Civilization was one of the great Mediterranean civilizations in the period before the Mycenaean period of ancient Greece. The civilization dates from roughly 2500 to 1200 BCE in different stages of development. The Minoans are famous for their architectural designs, pottery, writing systems, colorful artwork, and perhaps most significantly, their navigational and seafaring skills. So why did this great civilization collapse? Well, archaeologists believe several facts contributed to its decline, most notably the volcanic eruption of Santorini, also known as the Thera eruption. There is much debate around the exact date of the eruption, with scientists dating it to about the 17th century BCE, while archaeologists suggest a date of between 1525 and 1500 BCE. Regardless of the exact date, the Santorini eruption would have devastated Crete, which lay to the south of the island. Some archaeologists have found seashells and other marine-based finds high up in the islands of Crete, suggesting a massive tsunami hit the island. Not only that, but the ash cloud from the eruption itself would have impacted food production. Evidence suggests the volcanic eruption did not cause the immediate collapse of the civilization, but instead triggered a crisis of the people that they just could not overcome. Number 6. The Nabataeans. The Nabataeans were a group of people that inhabited the desert areas of northern Arabia and southern Levant. They were originally one of several nomadic tribes that roamed the Arabian deserts. Given the harsh climates and challenges posed by living in a desert environment, the Nabataeans had to be inventive with their agricultural practices and in sourcing water. Unfortunately, no Nabataean literature has survived, nor are there any inscriptions on temples or other buildings associated with the civilization. As a result, archaeologists have been left to piece together the puzzle. What we do know is that Petra, the believed capital of the Nabataean people, was rapidly built in the 1st century BCE and, at its height, would have had a population of around 20,000 people. We're going to ask again, what happened to all of them? Well, like many groups of people, the Nabataeans were absorbed into the Roman Empire when Emperor Trajan annexed the kingdom. Instead of destroying or replacing the Nabataean culture, they were adopted into the larger Greco-Roman culture. Number 5. Maya Civilization. The Mayan Civilization was a Mesoamerican civilization that existed in the Americas before the Europeans arrived on the continent. Over millennia, they developed complex societies with impressive art, architecture, astronomical systems, mathematics, and calendar development. Oh, and they also practiced human sacrifices. At its height, the civilization encompassed much of modern southeastern Mexico, all of modern-day Guatemala and Belize, and the western parts of modern-day Honduras and El Salvador. A mighty empire considering the terrain and distances that they would have had to have traveled. The development of the civilization dates to before 2000 BCE, when the first development in agriculture and early settlements are recorded. In the following millennia, they developed complex societies and built monumental cities while they went through stages of urbanization. Although the ultimate decline of the civilization was the result of the Spanish conquistadors, the model for the Mayan civilization, which was based on the ritual authority of the ruler, was poorly structured, and by the 9th and 10th century CE, many of the large cities had been abandoned before the Spanish had even arrived. Nevertheless, when they did arrive, they went about destroying what remained of this once great civilization. Thankfully, many smaller villages survived Spanish colonial authority, and today, many people still speak the Mayan-related languages. Number 4. Indus Valley Civilization. During the time of the great Old World civilizations, ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley civilizations were thriving in the northwestern regions of South Asia, stretching from modern-day northeast Afghanistan to Pakistan and northwest India. At its peak, it is believed to have had a population of over 5 million people, a considerable number given the period. Little, if anything, was known about this great civilization until the British started systematically mapping the British India and subsequently started excavating the sites they found. Since then, a mountain of information has been unearthed, and today the civilization is famous for its urban planning, elaborate drainage systems, water supply, and large non-residential buildings. So what happened to them? Well, archaeologists have identified signs that a gradual decline began around 1700 BCE when several cities were abandoned. Human skeletons from one of the sites, Harappa, also indicate an increase in diseases like leprosy and tuberculosis, not something that helps a declining civilization. As of 2016, most archaeologists believe that drought and reduced trade with other major civilizations caused the collapse of the Indus Valley Civilization, which involved the urban networks breaking down and people moving eastward to settle in more rural communities. Number 3. Aztec Civilization. The Aztec Empire was one of the great pre-Columbian civilizations, also referred to as the Mexica culture. It is prevalent in the post-classic period from about 1300 to 1521 CE. During this time, they developed complex cultures with impressive architecture, art, astronomical knowledge, calendars, complex religions, and mythologies. Oh, and like the Mayan Civilization, the Aztecs also practiced inhuman sacrifice, but they took it to a whole new level, with one account suggesting that they sacrificed 80,400 prisoners in just 4 days for a particular event. However, this number is also debated by academics. Nevertheless, it was a gruesome practice, and there are some detailed, bloody depictions of these rituals that have survived in the archaeological record. Thankfully, the practice itself died out with the arrival of the Spanish. Associated with the Aztec civilization is the Aztec Empire, which began as an alliance between 3 city-states, Tenochtitlan, Texcoco, and Tlacopan. Together, they ruled the Valley of Mexico between 1428 until the Spanish conquistadors defeated them in 1521. Like all great Mesoamerican civilizations, the Aztecs did not stand a chance when the Spanish arrived with their cannons, shiny armor, and New World diseases. Number 2. The Olmec Civilization. Considered the earliest known major civilization in Mexico, the Olmec Civilization dates from about 1500 BCE to 400 BCE. The heartland of their civilization was the area of the Gulf lowlands. Archaeological evidence suggests that they had their roots in early farming cultures which date back to around 5100 BCE. They developed unique artistic styles and were adept at making human and animal-like portrayals. There is even evidence to suggest that they might have performed bloodletting, and they appear to have had a good understanding of astronomy, with some attributing the long count calendar and the concept of zero to the Olmecs. So here's their story. Like many great ancient civilizations, archaeologists don't know for sure, but they identified a significant drop in the population towards the end of the culture, and theories explaining this range from changing environments to natural disasters such as volcanic eruptions. Like much of ancient history, it's doubtful that we'll ever know the full extent of what happened to the Olmec civilization, which is just typical. Number 1. Atlantis. There is much debate about whether the myth of Atlantis is fact, fiction, or a mixture of both. First discussed by Plato, Atlantis has inspired academics, writers, and filmmakers alike. The story goes that a once great civilization, far advanced from others at its time, was destroyed by sinking into the sea after angering the gods. Written as fiction, some modern archaeologists are convinced that the city existed, while others believe it was complete fiction. And then there are those who believe that it might be based in some fact. One leading theory is that Plato may have utilized stories of the Thera eruption that survived through oral history. Archaeologists are aware of the thriving civilization that once inhabited the island of Santorini, which lies just north of Crete, and some believe its destruction is what Plato was referring to. We might never know for sure whether some of the story is based on actual events, but it is one mystery that will continue to inspire many for generations to come. What do you think about the Atlantis myth? Did the civilization exist, or is it complete fiction? Write what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting stuff.